Imagine a world where the familiar hum of electricity suddenly ceases, not just in one city block or a single nation, but across every continent, plunging humanity into a profound, unprecedented darkness. The streetlights die, the televisions flicker into oblivion, and the digital symphony of our modern lives falls silent. This isn't the result of a solar flare scorching our satellites, nor the devastating aftermath of a global conflict. This chilling scenario stems from something far more insidious, something we ourselves engineered to power our very existence. What if every single nuclear reactor on Earth, the colossal silent giants that fuel our homes, hospitals, and industries, failed simultaneously? We live in an era where the narrative of nuclear safety is meticulously crafted. We are constantly reassured of redundant systems, fail-safes stacked upon fail-safes, and layers of protection designed to withstand almost any conceivable threat. But is this unwavering assurance a genuine comfort, a testament to engineering brilliance, or is it a carefully constructed narrative? A story spun to shield us from the uncomfortable questions about the true systemic vulnerabilities woven into the very fabric of our energy infrastructure? It's a question that hovers on the periphery of our collective consciousness, rarely given the weight it deserves. The idea of a widespread nuclear failure, a synchronized collapse of power across the globe, is often relegated to the realm of sensationalist fiction, a plot device for Hollywood blockbusters. It's dismissed as improbable, an absurdity too grand to ever manifest in reality. Yet perhaps its very absurdity is precisely why it remains a taboo topic, rarely discussed seriously, even by those who understand the intricate, often fragile, interdependencies of our energy systems. We shy away from contemplating such a catastrophic event, labeling it unthinkable, not because it's impossible, but because the implications are so utterly terrifying. What truly underpins the stability of these colossal powerhouses, these marvels of human ingenuity? What happens when that underlying assumption, that bedrock of reliability, crumbles? And not just in a single plant, a localized incident, but in all of them at the exact same moment, triggering a domino effect that could reshape civilization as we know it. The experts assure us of multiple layers of redundancy, of containment structures built to withstand the unthinkable. But what if the threat isn't a single component failure or even a localized natural disaster, but a shared vulnerability, a silent, insidious flaw embedded within the global system itself? A flaw so broad, so subtle, that it's been overlooked precisely because it lies beyond the narrow scope of traditional risk assessment. Every safety model, every meticulously calculated risk assessment operates on a set of fundamental assumptions about the world. Assumptions about human behavior, about geopolitical stability, about the predictable forces of nature. But what if these very assumptions are the weakest link? What if they are the cracks in the foundation, waiting for the right kind of pressure to give way? Our modern world is an intricate tapestry of interconnected systems, energy grids, cybersecurity networks, global supply chains, even the delicate balance of social stability. They are all inextricably intertwined. A failure in one can quickly cascade into others, creating a chain reaction that spirals out of control. Nuclear reactors, while seemingly isolated fortresses of power, are deeply embedded in this global web, making them susceptible to vulnerabilities far beyond their concrete walls. Before we delve deeper into this thought experiment, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. The genesis of this chilling what-if scenario, a world where every nuclear reactor simultaneously fails, doesn't emerge from a typical engineering problem or a simple component malfunction. Instead, it stems from a deeper understanding of systemic risks, a recognition that the most catastrophic failures often arise not from individual breakdowns, but from vulnerabilities embedded within the very architecture of our interconnected global systems. It's a conceptual leap beyond the conventional boundaries of accident analysis, official safety protocols, the very bedrock of nuclear assurance, are meticulously designed to address what are termed design basis accidents. These are the predictable, localized events: a pump failure, a pipe break, a specific natural disaster like a moderate earthquake, or a localized flood. Engineers meticulously plan for these scenarios, building in redundant systems and robust containment. But what about the events that fall entirely outside this design basis, the ones deemed too improbable to plan for or too broad in scope to fit within traditional risk models? This is where the true vulnerability lies, in the blind spots created by an over-reliance on historical data and localized threat assessments. Nuclear reactors, in their individual designs, boast multiple layers of redundancy: backup generators, redundant cooling systems, multiple control rooms. The intention is to create an almost impenetrable fortress against failure. Yet this illusion of redundancy can be a deceptive comfort. What if the failure mechanism isn't a single identifiable component within a reactor, but rather a shared vulnerability that affects all reactors simultaneously? Imagine a global cyber attack that targets a specific type of control software used across multiple reactor designs, or a previously unconsidered environmental phenomenon that undermines a universal safety feature. Such a threat wouldn't be a component failure. It would be a systemic flaw, a single point of failure within the global system itself, overlooked precisely because its scope transcends the typical localized engineering assessment. It's too broad, too subtle to be caught by conventional safety audits. Every safety model, every meticulously crafted risk assessment operates on a set of fundamental assumptions about the world. These are the unspoken rules that underpin our sense of security, assumptions about human behavior during a crisis, about geopolitical stability, about the predictability of natural forces, and even about the limitations of malevolent actors. What if these very assumptions are the weakest link? What happens when a global event, be it a pandemic, a widespread cyber warfare campaign, or an unprecedented solar storm, shatters these foundational assumptions? The entire edifice of safety, built upon these unexamined premises, could crumble, revealing the inherent fragility of systems designed for a world that no longer exists. Our modern world is an intricate tapestry, a densely woven web of interconnected systems. Energy grids, cybersecurity networks, global supply chains, even the delicate balance of social stability. They are all inextricably intertwined. A significant failure in one can quickly cascade into others, creating a chain reaction that spirals out of control. Nuclear reactors, while often perceived as isolated, self-contained fortresses of power, are in reality deeply embedded in this global web. They rely on the grid for external power, on complex digital networks for control, on global supply chains for maintenance and fuel, and on societal stability for their operational integrity. This deep entanglement means that a failure originating far beyond the reactor's physical boundaries could nonetheless trigger its demise, highlighting humanity's critical, adversarial relationship with systemic vulnerability. The very systems designed to provide energy become a conduit for unprecedented risk. Beyond the immediate, terrifying image of a core meltdown, the consequences of a simultaneous global nuclear failure extend into realms far more insidious and widespread. While a runaway reactor core is catastrophic, an equally devastating yet often overlooked threat lies in the spent fuel pools. These massive, water-filled basins, located at every nuclear site, contain highly radioactive used fuel rods. They are designed for continuous cooling, a process that requires a constant, reliable power supply to circulate water and dissipate the immense heat generated by the decaying isotopes. Without power, these pools would eventually boil away, exposing the spent fuel to the atmosphere. The ensuing fires and release of vast quantities of long-lived radionuclides would dwarf the immediate meltdowns in terms of long-term environmental contamination and health impacts. becoming massive sources of uncontrolled radiation, poisoning the air and soil for millennia. The invisible threat of radiation dispersion would not be confined to the immediate vicinity of the failing plants. Without power, monitoring systems would cease to function, containment measures would degrade rapidly, and any semblance of controlled release would vanish. How does radiation truly behave in an uncontrolled multi-site scenario? Official models, meticulously crafted for localized incidents, simply cannot account for this scale of simultaneous releases. Plumes from hundreds of facilities, carried by global wind patterns, would intermingle, creating a pervasive radioactive fog that blankets entire continents. The concept of safe zones would become obsolete, as the very air we breathe and the rain that falls would carry invisible, deadly particles. This isn't just a local catastrophe, it's a planetary poisoning. The global supply chain, an intricate web underpinning modern civilization, would face an immediate and irreversible collapse. Nuclear plants, even in their operational state, require constant inputs, specialized materials for maintenance, advanced diagnostic tools, expert personnel, and a steady flow of fuel. A global failure wouldn't just stop the electricity. It would cripple the very infrastructure needed to manage the aftermath. Imagine trying to transport crucial equipment, medical supplies, or even basic foodstuffs across contaminated landscapes with no power grids, no functional communication, and no reliable transportation networks. The specialized expertise required to even approach these dying facilities would be rendered useless by the sheer scale of the disaster and the breakdown of supporting systems. Societal breakdown would rapidly extend far beyond mere blackouts. The immediate impact, of course, is the absence of electricity, plunging billions into darkness and silence. But the secondary and tertiary effects would quickly devolve into something far more profound than just a lack of power. Communication networks would fail, severing the vital links that connect communities and governments. Economic paralysis would seize the world, as commerce grinds to a halt without power, digital systems, or reliable transport. Mass displacement would become inevitable, as populations flee radiation zones, overwhelming any existing refugee infrastructure. Resource scarcity, particularly for clean water and uncontaminated food, would become the dominant struggle, leading to widespread famine and disease. The fabric of society, built on the assumption of order and access to basic necessities, would be ripped apart, revealing a raw, brutal struggle for survival. Perhaps the most insidious consequence would be the psychological toll. The sheer scale of such a disaster, invisible, pervasive radiation, the collapse of all familiar systems, the loss of billions of lives, would unleash unprecedented global panic. Distrust in institutions, in science, in government would reach an all-time high, fueled by the catastrophic failure of systems designed to protect. A profound sense of helplessness would grip humanity, as the very forces that powered our world turn into an inescapable, persistent threat. How do societies function when the very fabric of their existence is ripped apart by an invisible, relentless enemy, and every assurance of safety has proven to be a lie? The trauma would echo through generations, fundamentally altering human perception of technology, progress, and our place in a radically changed world. The sheer scale of this potential devastation begs a crucial question. How could such a simultaneous global failure even occur? It's here that we must confront the concept of systemic escalation, where individual vulnerabilities coalesce into a catastrophe of unprecedented scope. While each nuclear reactor is an individual facility, their interconnectedness to regional, national, and increasingly international power grids creates a shared vulnerability that is often underestimated. A systemic collapse of the grid, perhaps initiated by a massive solar flare or a coordinated attack on critical infrastructure, could trigger failures at multiple sites, even if the reactors themselves were initially stable. Imagine the intricate dance of electricity across continents, a delicate balance maintained by sophisticated technology. Disrupt that balance on a global scale, and the cascade of protective shutdowns, equipment damage, and loss of off-site power could render hundreds of reactors vulnerable almost simultaneously, turning what was once a source of power into a power vacuum. But what if the simultaneous failure isn't accidental, but orchestrated? In an age of increasingly sophisticated digital warfare, the specter of cyber warfare looms large. A highly advanced, state-sponsored cyber attack, or even one launched by a rogue group, could target the very control systems, safety protocols, or even the power grids that support the reactors. This isn't science fiction. It's a chilling possibility that keeps cybersecurity experts awake at night. The Stuxnet virus, which targeted Iranian nuclear facilities, demonstrated the terrifying precision with which digital weaponry can manipulate physical systems. Now, imagine that capability scaled up, aimed not at one facility, but at the digital nervous system of the global nuclear infrastructure. Such an event would be the ultimate black swan, an unforeseen but devastating blow that bypasses all traditional physical safeguards. The unseen hand of a digital adversary could plunge the world into a nuclear nightmare without a single bomb being dropped. Moreover, geopolitical instability, a constant undercurrent in our volatile world, could act as a terrifying catalyst. In a world teetering on the edge of conflict, where regional tensions often flare, what if a localized event, perhaps a natural disaster in a politically sensitive region or a limited regional skirmish, escalates through a series of cascading failures? Such an event could ignite a chain reaction across the global nuclear infrastructure, especially if nations in a state of heightened alert or retaliatory action deliberately target energy systems or neglect critical maintenance due to conflict. The very act of war, even conventional conflict, could inadvertently trigger a nuclear catastrophe far beyond the battlefield, highlighting the profound and dangerous interconnectedness of global systems. In the face of such a true global crisis, the limits of international cooperation would be severely tested. Would international protocols and emergency response mechanisms, meticulously drafted in peacetime, hold up? Or would national self-interest, resource hoarding, and blame shifting quickly override any coordinated effort? The historical record suggests that in times of extreme scarcity and existential threat, cooperation often gives way to a desperate struggle for survival. Imagine a world where every nation is battling its own internal collapse, where borders are closed and aid is withheld. The very mechanisms designed to mitigate global disasters could unravel, leaving each nation to face an impossible task alone, multiplying the suffering and making recovery an even more distant dream. Ultimately, we face the terrifying prospect of a runaway train effect. Once a certain number of reactors fail, the sheer scale of the problem could overwhelm any existing emergency response capacity. The global community, even if united, simply does not possess the resources, the personnel, or the logistical capability to manage hundreds of simultaneous nuclear meltdowns and spent fuel pool fires. This creates a self-perpetuating cycle of further failures and escalating consequences that no plan, no matter how robust, could contain. The initial disaster would not be the end, but merely the beginning of an uncontrolled descent into an unprecedented global catastrophe, a true testament to humanity's critical, adversarial relationship with systemic vulnerability. The very systems designed to provide energy would become a conduit for an unimaginable, irreversible disaster. This brings us to the chilling moment when the unlikely becomes inevitable, the tipping point where a theoretical exercise transforms into a tangible, terrifying possibility. It's here that the sheer number of reactors, their geographic distribution across continents, and their profound interconnectedness within global systems create a critical mass. We've moved beyond isolated incidents or even regional catastrophes. We are now contemplating a scenario where the cumulative effect of failures, however initiated, overwhelms the planet's capacity to respond, turning a crisis into an existential threat. Consider the interplay of natural and man-made disasters. a confluence of events that could bypass all individual safeguards. Imagine a major solar flare, far more powerful than any recorded, unleashing an electromagnetic pulse that disrupts electronics and power grids worldwide, instantly crippling communication and control systems. Before the world can fully grasp the implications, a powerful, simultaneous earthquake strikes multiple tectonically active regions, damaging a percentage of reactors directly. Then, amidst the chaos, a sophisticated, globally coordinated cyber attack, perhaps exploiting the very vulnerabilities exposed by the solar flare, targets the remaining operational safety systems and emergency shutdown protocols. This isn't one disaster, it's a perfect storm. A layered catastrophe designed to exploit every weak point, every overlooked interdependency in our complex global infrastructure. Such a scenario moves beyond the design basis accident and into a realm of systemic collapse that redefines the very concept of catastrophic risk. In such a true global catastrophe, the human element, often overlooked in technical risk assessments, becomes a critical accelerator. Human error, already a factor in many historical incidents, would be magnified exponentially under conditions of extreme stress, panic, and overwhelmed decision-making. Operators, emergency responders, and high-level government officials facing unprecedented scale and scope of disaster would be forced to make impossible choices with incomplete information. The psychological impact of witnessing widespread societal breakdown, the loss of loved ones, and the pervasive fear of an invisible enemy could lead to critical mistakes, missed opportunities for containment, or even outright paralysis. Salvageable situations could quickly devolve into irreversible ones, not due to mechanical failure, but due to the inherent limitations of human resilience and decision-making under unimaginable pressure. The very individuals tasked with maintaining safety could inadvertently accelerate the crisis. This raises the terrifying question, is there a threshold, a specific number of simultaneous failures beyond which the world's ability to contain the disaster, manage the fallout, or even maintain basic societal order simply collapses? While no official models dare to quantify this exact number, the implication is clear. Once a certain percentage of the world's nuclear fleet is in an uncontrolled state, the sheer volume of radioactive material released, the widespread contamination, and the complete breakdown of global infrastructure would render any coordinated response futile. Society would fracture not just into nations, but into desperate, isolated communities battling for survival, utterly disconnected from any central authority or aid. This point of no return would mark the end of any semblance of organized human civilization, plunging us into a global dark age defined by radiation, scarcity, and chaos. Perhaps the most terrifying scenario of all is not a dramatic explosion or a visible meltdown, but the slow, silent degradation of systems. Imagine a situation where the alarms themselves are compromised, where the monitoring equipment fails due to power loss or cyber interference. The true scale of the disaster might only become apparent when it's already too late, when radiation levels spike uncontrollably, when containment structures begin to fail silently, when the spent fuel pools boil dry, not with a bang, but with an insidious, creeping thermal and radioactive release. The silence of the alarms, the absence of warning, would be a chilling testament to the profound vulnerability of our reliance on complex, interconnected systems, leaving humanity unaware of the full scope of its demise until the invisible enemy has already won. This is the ultimate betrayal of trust, the moment when the very systems designed to protect us turn into our silent executioners. In this grim panorama, where the invisible enemy has already won, we must confront the stark reality of who truly loses, who might against all odds survive, and who will ultimately bear the incomprehensible costs. The ultimate losers are, without question, humanity itself. The immediate and obvious victims are the global population, facing not only the direct threat of radiation exposure on an unimaginable scale, but also the cascading failures of societal collapse. Food and water security would vanish as supply chains break down and agricultural lands become contaminated. Medical systems would be overwhelmed, communications silenced, and the basic infrastructure that supports billions of lives would simply cease to exist. This isn't merely a setback. It's an existential threat, pushing our species to the brink of an uninhabitable future in many once thriving regions. The very concept of home would be redefined by zones of contamination and scarcity, forcing mass displacements on a scale that dwarfs any historical migration, leading to further conflict and suffering. Yet in such a cataclysm, could there be unseen beneficiaries, or at least those positioned to weather the storm better than others? Perhaps certain entities, groups, or even nations, operating outside the highly integrated global system, might find themselves marginally less impacted. Communities that have maintained a high degree of self-sufficiency, with localized food production, independent water sources, and minimal reliance on external power grids, could possess a fleeting advantage. Nations with vast, sparsely populated territories might offer pockets of refuge, though even these would eventually contend with atmospheric radiation and the influx of desperate refugees. There might even be groups who, having secretly prepared for such an eventuality, whether through bunkers, isolated compounds, or stockpiled resources, could emerge into a devastated world, inheriting a fractured planet. These survivalists, often dismissed as paranoid, might suddenly find their foresight validated, albeit in the most terrifying way imaginable. Their survival, however, would be a stark, lonely existence in a world fundamentally broken. The economic aftermath of such a global nuclear failure would be truly incomprehensible, dwarfing any previous disaster in human history. The sheer financial cost of cleanup, assuming any organized effort could even be mounted, would be astronomical, far exceeding global GDP. Entire industries would vanish overnight. The loss of global productivity, the destruction of infrastructure, and the permanent alteration of habitable land would mean an economic ice age from which recovery might be impossible. Who would bear the burden? National treasuries would be bankrupt, international financial systems would collapse, and any concept of insurance or compensation would become utterly meaningless. The cost would spread to every surviving individual, in the form of unimaginable scarcity, perpetual hardship, and the complete devaluation of any remaining currency or asset. The world's wealth, built over centuries, would be rendered worthless in the face of an invisible, persistent threat. Beyond the physical and economic devastation, the very fabric of human governance and trust would be irrevocably shredded. Governments, international bodies, and scientific institutions, those entities tasked with ensuring safety and providing guidance, would face an unprecedented crisis of legitimacy. Their assurances of nuclear safety, their promises of redundancy and fail-safes, would be exposed as tragically insufficient. The very systems designed to protect would be seen as having failed catastrophically, eroding any remaining public trust and authority. This would pave the way for widespread anarchy, the rise of desperate, localized power structures, and a profound global cynicism that would make any attempt at rebuilding a cohesive society incredibly difficult, if not impossible. The social contract, already strained in many parts of the world, would simply cease to exist. And finally, the silent victims, future generations. The environmental and genetic legacy of such a widespread radioactive event would impact countless generations, a silent, pervasive cost that would never truly be paid or understood in full. The contamination of land, water, and air would persist for centuries, if not millennia, leading to increased rates of cancer, birth defects, and other radiation-induced illnesses. The genetic blueprint of humanity itself could be altered, a permanent scar etched into our very DNA. This isn't just about survival. It's about the quality of that survival, the profound and irreversible damage inflicted upon the innocent, those who played no part in the creation of such a dangerous world. Their existence would be a continuous, agonizing tribute to the failures of the past, a silent, pervasive cost that would never truly be paid or understood in full, a burden passed down through time. The uncomfortable truth that emerges from this terrifying scenario is not simply a flaw in engineering or a lapse in judgment, but a fundamental, systemic vulnerability woven into the very fabric of our modern existence. Our reliance on such powerful, complex, and interconnected systems inherently creates risks on a scale we rarely acknowledge, let alone truly comprehend. We have built a world that is exquisitely efficient, yet terrifyingly fragile, where the failure of one seemingly isolated component can ripple outwards, touching every corner of the globe. This isn't just about nuclear power. It's a mirror reflecting the inherent instability of any hyper-optimized, intricately linked system, from global finance to digital networks. We have, in essence, put all our eggs in a single, increasingly delicate basket. This intricate dependency fosters an illusion of control, a comforting but ultimately dangerous belief that we can engineer perfect safety, that every contingency can be foreseen and mitigated. We strive for absolute command over natural forces, for fail-safe mechanisms that promise impenetrable security. Yet, the reality is far more nuanced. The more complex a system becomes, the more points of unexpected failure emerge, often not within individual components, but at the interfaces between different systems, in the subtle, unforeseen interactions that no single design team could fully predict. It's in these interstitial spaces, these seemingly minor connections, that the greatest vulnerabilities lie, waiting for the right confluence of events to unravel the entire construct. The pursuit of perfect safety, paradoxically, often breeds new, more insidious forms of risk. Our relentless pursuit of abundant, cheap energy has led us down a path where we willingly embrace technologies with immense destructive potential. Nuclear power, with its promise of limitless clean energy, has always carried a Faustian bargain: incredible power for incredible risk. Perhaps in our haste for progress and convenience, we have consistently downplayed the true, long-tail risks in exchange for immediate benefits. The allure of cheap electricity, the drive to power ever-growing populations and industries, has overshadowed the profound questions about the ultimate cost of that convenience. We have focused on the benefits, while relegating the potential for catastrophic failure to the realm of the improbable, a distant, abstract threat that surely someone else is managing. This short-sightedness, this prioritization of the immediate over the existential, is a dangerous gamble with the future of our species. So, why isn't this chilling scenario openly debated by those in power, by the scientific community, or even in mainstream discourse? Why is the discussion so often relegated to the fringes, dismissed as sensationalism or fear-mongering? Is it a genuine fear of inciting panic? A belief that such conversations are counterproductive to public order? Or is it a more pragmatic, cynical protection of vast economic interests, where admitting such vulnerabilities would threaten the very industries that underpin global power structures? Perhaps it's simply the overwhelming scale of the problem, a challenge so immense and multifaceted that it paralyzes even the most brilliant minds, leading to a collective avoidance of a truth too terrifying to confront. The silence itself becomes a symptom of the systemic vulnerability, a refusal to look directly at the monster we have created. The question that lingers long after the hypothetical dust settles is perhaps the most critical of all. What if the very act of dismissing such a scenario as impossible is precisely what makes us most vulnerable to it? What are we truly ignoring? And what price might we pay for that collective ignorance? By pushing these uncomfortable truths into the shadows, By relying on assurances that often gloss over deep-seated systemic flaws, we remain blind to the precipice upon which we stand. The true danger isn't just the potential for a global nuclear catastrophe. It's our collective inability or unwillingness to confront the foundational fragilities of the world we have built. The ultimate price of this ignorance wouldn't just be a temporary setback, but a permanent alteration of our planet. A silent, pervasive cost borne by future generations. A testament to the profound and tragic consequences of our own making.